Welcome. So here's the thing. We need to completely dismantle what we think we know about the sun signs because I'm going to say something that's probably going to sound wrong at first because it felt wrong at first when I was thinking about it. And I would like you to stay with me while I explain it. Your sun sign's not your personality. And I feel like that sounds weird because literally everyone talks about sun signs like they are personality. Like, oh, he's a Taurus, so he's so stubborn, or they're a Gemini, so they're so scattered, or they're a Leo, so they're so dramatic. We've all heard it a million times, right? It feels like basic astrology 101. But that entire framework, I think, is backwards because I feel like your sun sign isn't describing who you are, it's describing what you're learning to become. Again, not what you are, what you're building towards. And that distinction, that one shift in perspective changes literally everything about how astrology works. Because suddenly all of those personality traits we've been assigning to signs are not character descriptions, but are descriptions of what people look like while they're learning. I hope you let me show you what I mean. So when someone says, I'm a Taurus, what they usually mean is I am stubborn, I'm slow moving, I'm materialistic, I am into comfort and luxury and nice things. Like those are just facts about who they are as a person, their essential nature, their core personality. And then when someone says, oh, I'm a Gemini, they mean I'm scattered, I'm indecisive, I'm all over the place, I can't focus, I know a little about everything and not much about anything. And we've been treating those descriptions like they're just true. Like these are the personality traits that come with the territory, right? You got assigned Taurus at birth, so now you're just stubborn forever. You got assigned Gemini at birth, so now you're just scattered forever. That's just who you are. But that framework, I think, kind of misses completely that these traits aren't describing a fixed personality. They're describing a learning process. What if when we say Taurus is stubborn, we're not actually describing an essential Taurus quality? We're describing what someone looks like when they're trying to learn how to create stability, but they haven't figured it out yet. What if they're gripping instead of building? They're confusing rigidity. Did I say that right? Rigidity? Rigidity. I never can speak. But they're confusing that with being steady, right? They're holding on too tight because they just don't understand yet what real security actually requires. The stubbornness isn't a destination. I think it's what the journey looks like when you're early in the process. Another example, when we say Gemini is scattered, we're not describing an inherent Gemini flaw. We're describing what happens when someone is trying to learn mental flexibility, but they're still in the collection phase. They're gathering information from everywhere, making connections between fields, seeing patterns across domains, but they kind of haven't figured out how to integrate it all. So it looks scattered and unfocused and like they can't commit to anything. But that scatteredness, that's not a personality defect. I think that's what just the early stages of learning how to formulate all these connections looks like. The traits we've been calling personality, I think they're just actually just descriptions of people at different stages in their learning curve. So let me back up and explain this properly because I feel like I'm making a pretty big claim here. When I say your sun sign is what you're learning to become, I don't mean that in a vague aspirational way. I don't mean like, oh, you should try to be more like your sign. I actually mean it very specifically that your sun sign describes the survival strategy you're learning to embody over the course of your entire life. Not some personality you already have, but a capacity you're building, a skill you're developing, a strategy you're learning to execute differently or effectively. And here's where the seasonal piece becomes critical because that's what makes the whole thing to me make sense. Each zodiac sign corresponds to a specific moment in the solar year. And that moment has specific climate conditions, specific light levels, temperature range, resource availability. And those conditions teach a very specific survival strategy. Not because of magic or cosmic influence, but because for most of human history, the season you were born into literally shaped how your early nervous system learned to regulate. It shaped what your body learned about safety, timing, about when to act and when to wait, and about how to manage resources. And even though most of us aren't farming anymore, even though we're not literally dependent on the harvest for survival, our nervous systems know no difference, right? They still respond to those seasonal patterns. And more importantly, their strategies still work because we're still living in cycles. We're still moving through periods of expansion and contraction, abundance and scarcity, action and rest. The zodiac is just a map of those strategies, just like January is the map of when January's happening, February, March, April, May, go on and on. And your sun sign is showing you which strategy you came here to learn, which capacity you're meant to develop, which skill you're supposed to get good at over the course of your life. So when we say someone's a Taurus, what we're actually saying is this person's life assignment is learning how to build things that last, how to work with material reality, money, resources, physical form, the body, the earth itself, how to create sustainable value, how to be patient with processes that takes time, how to understand quality versus quantity. See, that's not a personality type, that's a skill set. And they're going to spend their entire life getting better at it. When we say someone's a Gemini, what we're really saying is that this person's assignment is learning how to synthesize information and to make connections, thinking across domains, how to see patterns that other people miss, how to translate between fields, how to communicate complex ideas in ways that lands, how to circulate information in a strategic manner. Again, not a personality, I think more of a developing competence. And here's the thing that I think makes this actually useful. When you stop treating the sun sign as who you are and start treating it as what you're learning, suddenly all those difficult traits makes perfect sense because they're not flaws or problem to fix. They're just what the learning process looks like at different stages. Okay, so let's take Aries as a first example because Aries is the first sign and I think it's a very clear demonstration of how this reframe works. So, Aries season starts around March 20th, 21st. That's the spring equinox. And what's happening in the natural ground at that moment? Winter just broke. The ground just thawed. Things are starting to grow again, but nothing's stable yet. Frost could still come back. The resources aren't guaranteed. Competition is intense because everything is still trying to grow at the same time. So if you're a plant trying to survive in this moment, your strategy is to push up fast. You're not going to be waiting around. You don't check if conditions are perfect. You don't sit there analyzing whether it's the right time or not. You just go. Because if you even hesitate a little bit, you wait for someone else to tell you that it's safe to go, you're going to be losing your spot. And someone's going to take the light and get the space. Because early spring teaches to move fast or lose your chance. That's the climate condition. That's the physical reality of the season. And humans born into this moment, their nervous systems are developing inside this energy, inside this urgency, inside this move now or miss your window pressure. And that shapes something fundamental about how they learn to operate in the world. They internalize this idea that timing matters, that you have to act quickly, that hesitation equals death. Not because they're reckless or impulsive by nature, but because that's, excuse me, what the season taught them about survival. And that's what Aries is. That's what the symbol represents. But here's the critical piece that I think we always miss. That learning to move at the right time, child, is a skill. And like any skill, you're bad at it before you're good at it, right? So when a person is an Aries that's young, or they haven't developed their full capacity, this looks like impulsive and reckless, and it looks like they're starting things but not finishing them, like they're acting without thinking, like they're hot-headed and reactive, and they can't slow down enough to consider consequences. And we've been calling that what the Aries personality, like, oh yeah, Aries people, they're just impulsive. That's just how they are. But no, that's not what that is. That's what someone looks like when they're learning initiative and timing but haven't mastered it yet. They're trying to develop this capacity for sensing the right moment to act, for breaking through when breakthrough is needed, for initiating movement when everyone else is frozen, but they're still in those early stages. They're still figuring out the difference between speed and timing, between impulse and instinct, between recklessness and courage. See, the impulsiveness isn't the Aries trait, it's what early stage Aries learning looks like. And then what happens if an Aries person gets really scared of that impulsiveness? If they get told over and over and over that they're just too much, they're too intense, they need to slow down, they need to think things through. If they internalize the idea that their natural instinct to move is a problem, they're going to freeze up completely, right? Become paralyzed, like they can't make choices. They're going to wait for permission for everything and second guess themselves constantly. And they're going to shut down their ability to initiate entirely. And that's not because they stop being Aries. That's what happens when an Aries person is actively resisting their assignment. When they're so afraid of being impulsive that they've cut themselves off from the very capacity that they're supposed to be developing. So, like, let's look at this as three different versions of Aries, right? We're going to have the undeveloped version. That's going to be impulsive, reckless, starting things, not finishing them, acting without thinking. And then let's call the second one the resisting version, where they're paralyzed, frozen, can't make choices, waiting for permission, shut down entirely. And then let's think about the next one as the developed version. So we have undeveloped, resisting, and develop. And the developed version of an Aries would be someone who knows actually how to initiate, who has genuine instinct for timing, who can sense when the window is open and they'll act decisively without all the information. Someone who breaks through when breakthrough is needed, who moves when everyone else is frozen, not because they're reckless, but because they've developed real skill at sensing opportunity. And all of three of those are Aries. They're just Aries at different stages of the learning process. The developed version isn't like just more true to the sign. It's just what it looks like when someone has actually learned the skill their sun sign is asking them to learn. And that's true for every single sign. So let me give you a few more examples so you can see how this pattern holds across the whole zodiac. Let's do Taurus next because it comes right after Aries, and I think that contrast is really useful. So Taurus season starts around April 20th. And in the natural world, what's happening at that point is that spring's fully here. We got things rapidly growing, but unlike early spring, there's some actual stability now. The ground is warm, frost isn't coming back, resources are available. So the strategy shifts. And late spring teaches to build sustainably, to go deep, to create foundation, to work with what's actually here. If you're a plant in late spring, you're not racing to break through anymore. You're sending roots down. You're building structure that can support long term growth. You're working with abundance that's available right now and you're storing it for later. So people born into this moment, their nervous systems are developing inside of this energy of sustainable building, of working with material reality, of understanding that real security comes from creating something solid, not from gripping or controlling. So Taurus is learning how to build things that last, how to work with resources in a skillful way, how to be patient with processes that take time. But again, that's a skill, right? Not a personality. And people are bad at it before they're good at it. So, an underdeveloped Taurus looks like someone who's stubborn and rigid and unable to let go of anything. They will hoard resources because they're so terrified of scarcity. They will stay in situations way too long because leaving feels unstable. They'll grip so tight that they're actually preventing growth. We call that Taurus personality, but it's really not. It's what someone looks like when they're trying to learn how to create stability, but they're confusing control with like security. They're trying to build, but they don't understand yet that the real foundation requires flexibility, not being rigid. And what does resisting Taurus look like? It looks like someone who can't commit to anything, refuses to build, stays scattered and unstable because building feels like a trap. Someone who won't engage with material reality because they decided that caring about resources is like shallow or materialistic. I think that's what happens when a Taurus person rejects their assignment entirely. When they've been told that wanting stability makes them maybe boring or caring about resources makes them greedy. But a developed Taurus is someone who actually knows how to build, who can create lasting value, who understands how to work with material reality skillfully, and who has patience for the growth process, who creates security not by controlling everything, but by knowing how to generate and sustain resources. And again, I think all three of these versions are very Taurus. They're just different stages of the same learning process. Let me do one more in depth so the pattern really lands. Gemini season starts around May 21st, late spring into early summer. Maybe I'll go into each sign maybe. We'll see. But Gemini season starts around May 21st, late spring into early summer, and that's when peak growth is happening. Everything is thriving. The ecosystem is incredibly complex now, and all the different parts of the ecosystem needs to communicate with each other. Pollinators are moving in between plants, the information is circulating, resources are being exchanged. The whole system is kind of like talking to itself. So late spring and early summer, it teaches to circulate information, to make connections, to think across domains. So people born into this moment, they're learning how to do that human version of pollination, how to move between fields and make connections, how to see patterns that other people miss because those people are too locked into their single domain. Like they know how to like translate between languages, how to communicate in ways that actually land. See, Gemini is learning how to synthesize information and strategically circulate it. But you know where this is going? That's a skill. An early stage skill looks a little messy. So underdeveloped or undeveloped Gemini, it's an undeveloped. I've been meaning to say undeveloped Gemini. Looks scattered and they can't really focus on anything. And they have like 17 interests and can't go deep on any of them. They'll know a little bit about everything and not much about anything. They'll be flaky and can't commit and they'll be all over the place. And that's not the Gemini personality. That's what it looks like when you're trying to learn a lot, but you're still in this collection phase. You're gathering information from everywhere, making connections between fields, seeing links across domains, but you haven't yet figured out how to integrate it. So it just looks like chaos. And a resisting Gemini locks themselves in one rigid perspective. They'll refuse to learn anything new. They'll become the expert who only knows one thing and can't see outside of it. They'll shut down their natural curiosity entirely because they've been told that being interested in multiple things means you're superficial or flaky. But a developed Gemini, they can see patterns across domains that creates genuine insight. They can translate between fields in ways that generates real value. They can communicate complex ideas so clearly that people from completely different backgrounds can understand, and they'll be intellectually agile without being scattered. And once again, all three versions of Gemini, just different stages of learning the same capacity. Okay, so I know I've been going really hard on this point, but I need you to really understand why this shift matters because it's not just like a semantic difference. It fundamentally changes how astrology works and what it's for. When we treat the sun signs as personality types, I think astrology becomes this weird deterministic thing where you're just stuck with these traits, right? Like, I'm a Taurus, so I'm just stubborn. That's just who I am. Nothing I can do about it. And that's not useful. I think that's actually harmful because it takes people's growth edges, the places where they're actively trying to develop capacity, and it turns them into fixed character flaws. It tells people that the messy parts of their learning process are just who they are, so they might as well just stop growing. But when we reframe sun signs as developmental directions, as capacities you're building, as skills you're learning, suddenly the whole thing becomes actually useful. Because now these negative traits, I think they make perfect sense. They're not personality flaws that you need to fix. They're just what the learning curve looks like. And that means you can actually work with them consciously. If you're an Aries who keeps acting impulsively, you don't need to beat yourself up about being too impulsive. I think you can say, okay, I'm impulsive because I'm trying to learn timing and initiative, but I ain't mastered it yet. I'm confusing speed with what proper timing. So what would really help me actually develop better instinct? What would help me learn the difference between impulse and genuine opportunity? Or if you're a Taurus who can't let go of anything, you don't need to judge yourself for being too stubborn. I think you can say to yourself, okay, all right, I'm gripping because I need to learn security or learn how to create stability, but I don't yet trust that I can build it. I'm confusing control with security. So, what would help me actually learn to build? What would help me develop real confidence in my ability to generate resources? Or if you're a Gemini who feels scattered, you don't need to force yourself to focus more. I think you can say, all right, yeah, I'm scattered because I'm trying to learn how to put it all together, but I'm still in the collection phase. I haven't yet figured out how to integrate all this information I'm gathering. So, what would help me move from collection to integration? What would help me actually put it all together instead of just accumulating? Because you're not trying to fix yourself. You're trying to develop a capacity. And that's a completely different project. Now, I want to spend a moment or a minute on why the seasonal piece is so important here. Because without that, I think the whole framework just falls apart. The reason this isn't just arbitrary, the reason that these aren't just random personality categories we just made up, is because each sign corresponds to a real moment in the solar cycle with real climate conditions. Aries isn't just the sign of initiative because someone decided to make it that way. Aries is a sign of initiative because early spring is the moment where you have to initiate or you lose your chance. And what? Die. That's just what the climate teaches. That's the actual survival strategy that that moment requires. Taurus isn't just a sign of building because we assigned it that meaning. Taurus is a sign of building because late spring is the moment when you build foundation, when you work with abundant resources, when you send roots deep and you create structure that can last. Gemini isn't the sign of communication because someone thought that, oh, that just sounds good, girl. No, Gemini is the sign because late spring, early summer is when the ecosystem becomes complex enough that the information needs to circulate. When pollinators need to connect different parts of the system, and when connection becomes critical for survival. You see, the signs emerge from actual seasonal conditions. They're not abstract symbols. They're descriptions of what different points in the year actually teach. And because that matters, because it grounds the whole thing in observable reality. See, I'm not saying Aries people are impulsive because Mercury's in retrograde or whatever. I'm saying people born in early spring tend to internalize urgency because early spring is objectively the least stable moment in the growth cycle. And I think that creates a very specific nervous system response that shows up as a bias towards action. And that's not mysticism. That's just climate conditioning. And yeah, obviously, most of us aren't directly living off the land anymore. Most of us aren't farmers watching the frost level and timing our planting accordingly. But our bodies don't know that. Our nervous systems still respond to the light levels, the temperature, the energy of the season we're born into. And most importantly, the metaphors still work because even in 2026, we're still living in cycles. We still move through periods where we need to initiate and periods where we need to rest, periods where we need to build and periods where we need to let go, periods where we need to synthesize and periods where we need to just go deep. The zodiac is just a map of those strategies, and your sun sign is telling you which strategy you came here to learn. Not because the stars, oh, I just decided it, but because the season you entered this world shapes what your nervous system learned first about how to survive. So let me get off my soapbox, even though I'm still talking. I'm gonna walk you through some more of the zodiac. Because I know talking about Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, just because of the first three. But I want to be really specific about what each sign is kind of like learning versus what calling its personality. I'll probably just go to like maybe Virgo, and then maybe one day I'll come back and I'll talk about Virgo through Pisces in this manner. After I will, maybe tomorrow. Okay, I'm talking to myself again. But anyway, so let's talk about like the rest of spring and into summer probably. So Cancer season starts June 21st. It's summer solstice, longest day of the year, peak light, peak heat. And this is a time frame where everything is thriving. Growth is at its absolute maximum. But also, this is the moment where we start storing for winter. This is when you preserve the harvest, when you protect what you built, when you create shelter. So early summer teaches to protect what's valuable, to create containers, to build emotional safety. So Cancer is learning how to create environments where people feel safe, right? How to attend your emotional needs, how to build the kind of bonds that actually sustain people through hard times, how to know what's worth protecting and what's worth letting go. But an undeveloped Cancer will cling, smother, child ain't nobody leaving. They'll create emotional dependency. They'll use guilt and manipulation to keep people close. They'll treat everyone like children who need protecting even when they don't. And that's not Cancer personality. That's what you look like when you're trying to learn emotional attunement, but you're confusing protection with control. When you're so afraid of loss that you're trying to prevent anyone from even leaving. See, resisting Cancer, it refuses to care about anyone. It'll shut down all emotional needs. It'll become cold and detached because they decided that needing connection makes them weak. But a developed Cancer actually knows how to create safety, how to tend to emotional reality without drowning in it, how to protect what matters without becoming controlling, how to build bonds that sustains people without creating dependency. That's the capacity. That's what they're learning. And then we get to Leo season. Leo season is late July, early August, peak summer. This is where everything is fully expressed now and the ecosystem is showing what it can do, baby girl. And this is the quality of radiance and fullness and of creative output at its maximum. Because midsummer teaches to express what you really are, to generate creative energy, to sustain the thing that you're building. So Leo is learning how to fully show up, how to express what's inside without apologizing for it or hiding it, how to generate creative energy and sustain over time, how to be the thing that other people organize around, not because they're forcing it, but because that's what happens when you're actually radiating. And an undeveloped Leo, they're more so desperate for attention, probably need some constant validation, little hair rub every now and then or every day. They can't tolerate not being the center. They'll be dramatic for the sake of drama. They'll probably perform instead of actually being. And that's not Leo personality. That's what you look like when you're trying to learn how to be seen, but you don't yet trust that what you are actually is enough. So you're performing. You're manufacturing specialness because you don't know yet that you're inherently generative. And a resisting Leo will hide completely. They'll make themselves small. They'll refuse to be seen. They'll stay in the background because they've decided that wanting to be visible will probably make them like maybe like narcissistic or shallow. But a developed Leo actually knows how to radiate. how to express what they genuinely are, and how to generate creative energy that other people can actually feed off of, and how to be central without demanding it, and how to sustain their light without burning out. That's the skill they're building. And then we get into late August, early September, we're into Virgo season, the end of summer, harvest time. And that's when the climate condition is you're sorting everything. You're looking at what grew, what didn't, what's healthy, what's damaged, what's worth keeping, what needs to be discarded. Because late summer teaches to assess, sort, refine, and notice what's working, what's not working, and fix it before winter comes. So Virgo's learning how to see what other people miss, how to notice the small things that can indicate larger problems, how to refine systems so they actually work, how to maintain what's been built, and how to waste or prevent waste and inefficiency. So undeveloped Virgo is going to be very anxious and critical. They're going to notice everything that's wrong. They're not going to be able to rest because they're always seeing issues and problems. They're going to nitpick, and they're going to make other people feel like they're never good enough. And that's not Virgo personality. That's what you look like when you're trying to learn discernment, but you're stuck in anxiety mode. When your pattern recognizing is just like in this overdrive, and you haven't yet learned how to sort through useful information from the noise. Because see, resisting Virgo, it refuses to notice anything. It'll let systems decay. It won't maintain or refine because they decided that caring about details makes them uptight or controlling. But a developed Virgo actually knows how to assess and how to see problems early enough to fix them before the crisis comes. They'll be able to refine systems without making everyone feel criticized. They'll know how to maintain what matters without getting lost in perfectionism. That's what they're learning to do. I could keep going through all 12, but I hope you would get the pattern now. Excuse me. Every sign is survival strategy. Every sign is teaching a specific capacity, and every sign looks messy before it looks skilled. The personality traits we've been assigning are just descriptions of what people look like at different stages of learning their sign strategy. And I feel like once you see it that way, you kind of can't go back to treating signs as fixed personality traits because it's so obvious that what we're actually watching is people at different stages of skill development. Okay, so I want to kind of like bring this back to something practical because this isn't just a theoretical shift. This actually changes how you work with your chart, I think. Because if your sun signs your personality, then astrology is basically just describing you. It's just telling who you are. And that's fine, I guess. But I've never found that useful. Just kind of like, oh, cool, I learned something about myself, I guess. Neat, sure. But if your sun sign is showing you what you're learning, what capacity you're building, what skill you're developing, then suddenly doesn't astrology becomes a tool for growth? Because now we can ask some different questions. Not, am I doing my sign right? But where am I in the learning curve? Not more so like, why am I like this? But more so, what am I trying to learn? And what would actually help me develop that capacity? And, maybe instead of, is this trait good or bad? But instead, is this what early stage learning looks like? Or am I resisting the assignment entirely? I think you stop judging yourself and start diagnosing where the heck you are in that process. And I think that's more useful. Like if you're an Aries and you've been acting impulsively, you can say, okay, I'm impulsive because I'm in early stage initiative learning. I'm trying to develop timing and courage, but maybe I'm just still confusing speed with proper timing. So, like, what could help me develop better instinct? Maybe I need to practice pausing for 5 seconds before acting. That's something so small, but can make just such a big difference. Maybe I need to notice when my impulse to move is coming from fear versus opportunity. Maybe I need mentors who actually know how to read timing so I can learn from them. Very small things, but I think could be very massive things. Take a Virgo, for example. If you're a Virgo and you're anxious all the time, um, maybe you could look at it like, all right, I'm anxious because my recognizing patterns makes me run on overdrive. Because I think that's really more what it is. But I haven't learned how to filter useful information from noise. So you would be trying to learn discernment, but still stuck in like an assessment mode. So what would help you actually refine that? Maybe you need practice that will help you distinguish between problems you need to solve right now and maybe problems you need to notice for future reference instead. Put them in those categories. Maybe you need to build better containers for all the information you're collecting so it just doesn't end up like swirling in your head, creating anxiety. I'm a Virgo rising, so I'll be applying this thought to my own self. But like, you're not trying to fix your personality when you look at it this way. You're trying to develop your sun sign capacity more skillfully. And I think that just completely changed the project. Okay, so I kind of want to end this conversation, I guess, maybe about resistance, because I think it's really important. I don't think it's talked about enough because we've established that each sun sign is learning a specific capacity, right? And that the negative traits are probably just what more early stage learning looks like. But there's another version of those traits that I think is actually more concerning, and I think that's when someone's actively resisting their assignment. Because here's what happens sometimes. Sometimes people get told over and over that their science traits are bad, that their natural learning edge is a problem, that the thing that they've been trying to develop is actually a flaw. So they shut it down completely. The Aries person who's been told they're too impulsive becomes totally paralyzed. They can't make any choices. They wait for permission for everything. The Cancer person who's been told they're too emotional becomes completely detached. They won't let anyone close. They'll treat all connections as a weakness. The Leo person who's been told they're too attention seeking and make themselves invisible, stay in the background, refuse to be seen. That is what I'm talking about when I say resistance. And that's what that looks like. And I think that's actually worse than just being messy at your school because at least when you're messy, right, you're still engaging with the learning. You're still trying. You just ain't good at it yet. But when you're resisting, you've completely shut down the capacity you came here to develop. You've decided that your assignment is actually a character flaw, so you're going to pretend you never got it. And that doesn't work because your sun sign isn't optional. It's your life direction. It's the thing you're here to learn. You can resist it for a while, but eventually it's going to come back around. Eventually, you're going to hit situations that require exactly the capacity you've been refusing to develop. And then you're stuck because you haven't been practicing. You shut down the learning process entirely. So if you find yourself thinking, I'm nothing like my sun sign, I think that's actually worth investigating. Not because you need to force yourself to fit a stereotype, but because if you're genuinely not engaging with your sign's themes at all, there's probably resistance happening. There's probably some story you absorbed about why that capacity is bad or dangerous or not for you. And I think that story is worth unpacking because if you don't become the undeveloped version of your sign, I guess more so because you don't have to become the undeveloped version of your sign. You know, I kind of feel like you should. It's like evolve like a Pokemon. But I do think you need to develop the capacity. Like even if you don't become the undeveloped version of your sign, you still need to develop the capacity. And I typically see you have to go through the messy parts first to build the capacity. But it's not just what you're here for. So let me just kind of land this, okay? Let me bring it all around, wrap it up. Your sun sign not your personality. It's not a description of who you are. It's not a box you're stuck in. It's showing you what you came here to learn, what capacity you're building, what skill you're developing over the course of your entire life. And the traits we've been calling personality are just descriptions of what you look like while you're learning. They're not the destination, they're the journey. And when you're early in the process, you look messy. You look like the undeveloped version of your sign. Ugh. When you're resisting the process, though, you shut down completely and ugh, that as well, because you're not like your sun sign at all. But when you're actually engaging with your assignment, when you're consciously developing the capacity your sun sign is asking you to develop, you start to look skilled. You start to embody the thing in a way that's actually useful. And that's not some mystical transformation. That's just what skill development looks like in any domain. You're bad at it, then you're messy at it. Then you get competent. Then you get good. Then maybe eventually you get masterful. And that's what your sun sign is showing you. Not who you are, but what you're learning to become. And once you see it that way, astrology stops becoming this thing that describes you and starts being this tool that helps you understand where you are in your own development, which is actually useful, which for me is the whole point. Thank you guys for joining, and I will see you next time, whenever that is.